I'm Clara, 32, female, and my life was turned upside down when my own mother screamed, "We're not your damn servants," while I was lying injured in the very house I bought for them. That one sentence was like a flash of lightning, illuminating years of subtle disrespect and favoritism that I had willingly ignored. Kicking them out was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But what I discovered in the quiet aftermath of that storm changed not just my future, but my entire understanding of the past. To understand how we got to that point, you have to understand my family. We were on the surface a typical middle-class family. My father, David, was a mail carrier, a man whose defining characteristic was his quietness. He was a gentle soul, but his gentleness often tipped over into passivity. He floated through life on the currents created by my mother, Helen. My mother had been a retail manager, and she brought the job home with her every day. She was the CEO of our family, managing every decision, every mood, and every conflict. She wasn't overtly cruel, not in a way a stranger would notice, but she managed her family like she managed her store employees, with a clear, unshakable hierarchy. And in that hierarchy, I was never at the top. That position was reserved for my younger brother, Mark. Mark, 4 years my junior, was the sun around which our family's solar system revolved. He was the golden child, a term I only learned in therapy years later. He was a struggling musician, which my mother translated into brilliant artist on the cusp of greatness. Every decision was filtered through the lens of Mark's needs, Mark's comfort, Mark's potential. I remember one of the first times this dynamic became painfully clear to me. I was 17 and had spent an entire summer working a tedious job at a local diner, saving every penny for a school trip to Spain. It was my dream. I had brochures taped to my bedroom wall, and I practiced my broken Spanish with a language app every night. I had saved up almost the entire amount, with my parents promising to contribute the last couple of $100s. So, a week before the final payment was due, I came home to find my mother and father at the kitchen table with Mark, who was holding a brand new, gleaming electric guitar. It was a professional model, far beyond anything he could afford. My heart sank before a single word was spoken. Mark was beaming, my father was looking proudly at him, and my mother had an expression of supreme satisfaction. "Look, Clara," she said, her voice bright. "Mark's band has a real shot at winning that Battle of the Bands contest, but his old guitar just wasn't good enough. This will give him the edge." I looked at the guitar, then at my parents. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "How?" My mother's smile tightened just a fraction. "Well, your father and I decided to help him out, an investment in his future." Later that night, I asked them about the money for my Spain trip. My mother avoided my gaze, busying herself with folding laundry. "About that, honey," she started, her tone now soft and placating. "We had to make a tough choice. Mark's opportunity is right now, a real chance. Your trip? Well, there will always be other trips. You're so responsible, you understand." I didn't understand. I felt a hot, sharp sting of injustice. I had worked all summer for that trip, and in one afternoon, my dream had been packed up and handed to my brother. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I just went to my room, took the brochures off the wall, and cried silently into my pillow. I learned a lesson that day. My hard work was a resource, and my brother's dreams were the priority. Years passed, and I channeled that feeling into my own ambition. I worked hard in school, got a scholarship to a good college, and poured myself into my career as a graphic designer. I was successful. I loved the creativity, the challenge, and the financial independence it gave me. That independence became my shield. Meanwhile, Mark's music career never quite took off. The Battle of the Bands victory never materialized. He drifted from one part-time job to another, always with my mother's staunch defense. "He can't be tied down to a dead-end job. It would crush his soul." When my father had to retire early due to health issues, my parents' financial situation, always precarious, became a full-blown crisis. They were in danger of losing their small rental home. The phone calls started first from my father, full of quiet panic, then from my mother, full of carefully constructed guilt. "We don't know what we're going to do, Clara," she'd say. "Your father's health is so poor, the stress is killing him, you're the only one who can help." I was 30 years old with a good salary and significant savings. I had been planning to buy my own condo, a small, stylish place downtown. But the weight of their expectation, the years of ingrained responsibility set T-led on me. I saw their faces etched with worry and I caved. I didn't just help them, I shelved my own dream and took on theirs. I drained my savings and took out a mortgage on a 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood large enough for all of us. The title was solely in my name, a fact my lawyer insisted upon, but the understanding was that it was their home. I would live with them and my salary would cover the mortgage and all the major bills. Their gratitude was overwhelming at first. "You're a lifesaver, Clara," my father said, tears in his eyes. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "You'll never know how much this means. We're so proud of you." For a little while, it felt right. It felt good to be the provider, the one they could count on. But even then, the old dynamic began to creep back in. Little comments from my mother would chip away at my feeling of accomplishment. If I bought a new dress for a work event, she'd say, "That must have been expensive. It's a good thing you have such a high-paying job to afford the mortgage." It wasn't a compliment, it was a reminder. My money wasn't just my money, it was the family's safety net. She and my father settled into the 2 downstairs bedrooms while I took the one upstairs. Slowly, they began to treat the house as entirely their own, with me as a long-term, bill-paying guest. The main living room became their space, decorated with their old furniture and photos. My own things remained mostly in my room. I told myself it didn't matter. I was busy with work. They were retired. It was only fair. I was so used to making myself smaller to accommodate them that I didn't even realize I was doing it. Life settled into a predictable rhythm. I worked long hours at the design firm, often coming home late, mentally exhausted. My parents would be watching television in the living room, and I'd exchange a few pleasantries before retreating to my room to decompress or finish up some freelance work. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance. I transferred a generous amount into a joint account every month for groceries and household expenses. I was the financial engine of the house, and they were the live-in caretakers. It wasn't the life I had pictured for myself at 32, but it was stable. I told myself I was doing a good thing for my family. The day it all changed was a Tuesday in late autumn. The sky was a flat, washed-out gray, and a cold rain was slicking the roads. I was driving home from a client meeting, thinking about the presentation I had to finish. I was stopped at a red light, humming along to a song on the radio when I glanced in my rearview mirror. What I saw was a blur of blue metal, a large truck skidding on the wet pavement, coming way too fast. There was no time to think, no time to brace myself. There was only the horrifying screech of tires and the violent, deafening crunch as the truck slammed into the back of my car. My head whipped back against the headrest, then forward. The world became a chaotic symphony of shattering glass and twisting metal. My car was shunted forward into the intersection, finally coming to a stop against a traffic light pole. Then silence except for the frantic blaring of my own car horn and a dull, roaring sound in my ears. I tasted copper. My first coherent thought was a strange one: I'm going to be late. Then the pain hit. A searing, white-hot agony flared in my left leg. I looked down and saw it was twisted at an unnatural angle. The rest of my body was a landscape of throbbing aches and sharp stings. The next hour was a blur of sirens, concerned faces peering through my shattered window, and the careful, methodical work of the paramedics. They cut me out of the car, stabilized my leg, and loaded me onto a stretcher. The last thing I remember before the pain medication kicked in was the gray, rainy sky spinning above me. I woke up in a hospital bed. The world smelled of antiseptic and disinfectant. A heavy, cumbersome cast encased my left leg from my thigh to my ankle. A doctor with a kind, tired face explained the damage: a compound fracture of the tibia and fibula, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion. "You're very lucky," he said. "It could have been much worse, but it's going to be a long recovery. You'll be on bed rest for at least 6 weeks and then months of physical therapy." My parents arrived a little while later. My father looked pale and genuinely terrified. He rushed to my bedside, his hand trembling as he touched my arm. "Clara, my goodness, we were so worried." I saw real fear and love in his eyes, and it was a comfort. My mother's reaction was different. She looked stressed, yes, but it was a different kind of stress. Her eyes darted around the hospital room, taking in the IV drip, the monitors, the enormous cast on my leg. "Oh, Clara," she said, her voice tight, "this is just awful, a complete disaster." She hugged me, but it was a stiff, distracted embrace. Her First practical question wasn't, "Are you in a lot of pain?" or "What did the doctor say?" It was, "How in the world are we going to manage now?" The question hung in the air, revealing a truth I wasn't ready to face. Her immediate concern wasn't for my well-being, but for the inconvenience my injury would cause. I was too groggy and pain-riddled to process it fully, so I pushed it away. "It'll be okay, Mom," I mumbled. "The company has good insurance. I can work from home once I'm feeling a bit better." A few days later, they discharged me. Getting from the hospital to the car and from the car into the house was an ordeal of excruciating pain and clumsy maneuvering. They set me up in my upstairs bedroom as the guest rooms downstairs were occupied by them. This meant I was essentially stranded on the second floor. I couldn't navigate the stairs on my crutches. I was completely dependent on them for everything: food, water, medicine, help getting to the bathroom. The first few days were manageable. My father was attentive, bringing me meals and making sure I was comfortable. He'd sit with me and we'd watch old movies, his quiet presence a balm, but he always seemed to be looking over his shoulder, waiting for my mother's direction. Helen organized my medication schedule with brisk efficiency, but her movements were sharp, her jaw tense. The air was thick with her unvoiced sighs. She was doing her duty, but there was no warmth in it. It felt transactional. I was a problem to be managed, a disruption to her routine. I was no longer the capable, independent daughter who provided for them. I was a patient, a burden, and it was clear she was already starting to resent it. The initial phase of dutiful care lasted less than a week. Soon, the small signs of my mother's resentment began to multiply, like cracks spreading across a frozen lake. They were subtle at first. A meal would arrive an hour late, lukewarm and unappetizing, placed on my bedside table with a thud and no comment. When I'd thank her, she'd respond with a curt before turning and leaving the room, closing the door a little too loudly behind her. My requests for help, no matter how small, were met with an audible, long-suffering sigh. If I needed a fresh glass of water or help adjusting my pillows, she would stop whatever she was doing, usually watching her favorite TV show or talking on the phone, and her whole body would communicate the immense effort it was costing her. Her footsteps on the stairs were heavy, her expression perpetually annoyed. "I was just about to sit down for a minute," she'd say, as if my needing something was a personal affront to her right to relax. I started to dread asking for anything. The guilt was a constant, heavy weight in my chest. I felt like an intruder, a nuisance in my own home. I tried to make myself as small and undemanding as possible. I kept a bottle of water by my bed to make it last all day. I'd wait until my pain was almost unbearable before buzzing the small intercom we'd set up just to avoid bothering her. My father, David, was caught in the middle. He tried to be helpful, but he was terrified of my mother's moods. He would sneak into my room when Helen was busy in another part of the house, his expression apologetic. He'd refill my water, ask if I needed anything, and speak in hushed tones as if we were co-conspirators. "Is the pain bad today?" he'd ask, his eyes full of genuine sympathy. "It's okay, Dad, I'm managing," I'd lie, not wanting to put him in a difficult position. If Helen entered the room while he was there, he would immediately stand up and find a reason to be busy. "Just checking on her," he'd mumble, scurrying away before he could be accused of coddling me. He was a kind man, but his fear of my mother's disapproval made him ineffective. He offered silent sympathy, but never active support. My brother Mark was a ghost. He called once, the day after I got home from the hospital. The conversation was brief and awkward. "Whoa, that sounds rough, Clara," he'd said after I explained my injuries. "A broken leg, bummer." "It's not great," I said, hoping for a word of brotherly comfort. "It's going to be a long recovery." "Yeah, well, you'll be back on your feet in no time," he said with breezy, unconcerned optimism. "Listen, I gotta run. We've got a potential gig we're practicing for. Super important, you know how it is. Tell Mom and Dad I said hi," and he was gone. He never offered to visit. When I mentioned it to my mother, she was quick to defend him. "Oh, honey, you know how busy he is. This gig could be his big break. He can't afford to get distracted. He feels terrible, of course, but his career has to come first. He asked me to send you his love." Her passionate defense of him stood in stark contrast to her treatment of me. His potential gig was a sacred duty, while my crippling injury was a tedious chore. The injustice of it was a bitter pill to swallow. I was paying for the roof over all their heads, and yet my basic needs were treated as an imposition, while my brother's vague aspirations were treated as a national priority. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into my recovery, the cracks widened into a chasm. I was working on my laptop, trying to keep up with my job from bed. A client had sent a frustratingly vague email, and I was trying to decipher it. My mother came in with my lunch, a hastily made sandwich, and a bag of chips. She glanced at my screen. "Still working?" she asked, her tone laced with something I couldn't quite decipher. It sounded like disapproval. "I have to," I said. "Projects don't stop just because I'm stuck in bed. Besides, the mortgage isn't going to pay itself." I meant it as a simple statement of fact, but she took it as an accusation. Her face hardened. "There's no need to throw that in our faces, Clara. We are perfectly aware of what you do for this family. You don't have to remind us that you pay for everything." I was stunned. "Mom, that's not what I meant at all. I was just thinking out loud." "It's fine," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just, you're always so focused on work and money. Sometimes it seems like that's all that matters to you." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. My focus on work was the very thing keeping a roof over her head, the very thing she used to guilt me into buying the house in the first place. I was being criticized for the very quality they depended on for their survival. I didn't have the energy to argue. I just stared at her, a profound sense of exhaustion washing over me. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly. She left the room, and I looked down at the bland sandwich on the plate. I had no appetite. The feeling of being a burden was now mixed with a new, more painful one, the feeling of being fundamentally misunderstood and unappreciated by the one person I needed most. I was trapped in my bed, in my house, in a family dynamic that was becoming more toxic by the day, and I was starting to realize that the physical pain in my leg was nothing compared to the emotional pain of my mother's resentment. The fourth week was the worst. A damp chill had settled into the house, and the constant ache in my leg seemed to deepen with the weather. The initial adrenaline of the accident had long worn off, replaced by a monotonous cycle of pain, boredom, and a growing sense of despair. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my bedroom. The view from my window, a panorama of gray sky and bare tree branches, was my only connection to the outside world. My mother's resentment was no longer a subtle undercurrent, it was a palpable force in the house. Our interactions were clipped and functional, stripped of any warmth. She was an overworked nurse attending to a difficult patient, and I was that patient. The intercom on my bedside table, once a symbol of care, now felt like a button that delivered an electric shock of irritation downstairs. That afternoon, a wave of sharp, throbbing pain washed over my leg. It was the kind of pain that made it hard to breathe, that clenched every muscle in my body. I looked at the clock. It was 4:15 p.m. My next dose of pain medication was due at 4:00. My mother, who usually kept a strict schedule, had forgotten. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The pain intensified, radiating up my hip. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to breathe through it. I didn't want to buzz her. I didn't want to face the sigh, the heavy footsteps, the look of annoyance. But the pain was becoming unbearable. Finally, I surrendered and pressed the button. "What is it?" Her voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and impatient. "Mom," I said, my voice strained. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think it's past time for my medication. The pain is really bad." There was a long pause. I could hear the faint sound of the television in the background. "I'm on the phone, Clara," she snapped. "It'll have to wait." The dismissiveness of her tone was like a slap in the face. I was in agony, and her phone call was more important. "Mom, please," I begged, hating the weakness in my own voice. "I really need it." Another sigh, this one loud and theatrical, followed by the sound of the intercom being shut off. I lay there, helpless, tears of pain and frustration welling in my eyes. I heard her downstairs, her voice rising in irritation as she ended her call. "No, Mark, it's fine. It's just your sister again. Yes, I'll call you back." Of course, she was talking to Mark. A few minutes later, her footsteps pounded up the stairs. She didn't knock. The door flew open, and she stood there, her face a mask of fury. She held the small paper cup with my pills and a glass of water, but she didn't move toward me. Do you have any idea how disruptive you are? She began, her voice low and trembling with anger. I get 2 minutes of peace to talk to my son and you have to interrupt. It's one thigh. NG after another with you. I need this, I need that, all day long. I stared at her bewildered. Mom, it was my medication time, you forgot. I didn't forget, she shot back, though we both knew she had. I have a million things to do, running this house, cooking, cleaning, and on top of it all, running up and down these stairs for you. I have a life, your father and I, we have our own lives. Her voice was rising with each word, the injustice she felt pouring out of her. And then came the words that would echo in my mind for years to come, the words that shattered the last remaining illusions I held about our family. She took a step forward, her eyes blazing. We are not your damn servants. She didn't just say it, she screamed it. The words hung in the air, vibrating with a raw, ugly venom. It was the culmination of every sigh, every resentful look, every passive-aggressive comment of the past month. It was the truth of how she saw me, not as her injured daughter needing care, but as a tyrannical master demanding service. In that moment, something inside me broke. The pain in my leg, the weeks of guilt, the crushing loneliness, it all vanished, replaced by a sudden, shocking clarity. It was as if I had been looking at a blurry photograph my whole life, and in that instant, it snapped into sharp, perfect focus. The favoritism towards Mark, the financial guilt trips, the constant invalidation of my feelings, it all led to this. I was not her daughter, I was a resource. And now that I was a broken resource, I was nothing but a burden. My tears dried up, the hurt receded, replaced by a cold, quiet calm. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw a stranger. I held her gaze, my voice, when it came out, was steady and devoid of emotion. You're right, I said, you're not my servants. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Her angry expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She had expected tears or an argument. She wasn't prepared for this. This is my house, I continued, each word precise and deliberate. I pay the mortgage, I pay the bills, and I will not be spoken to like this in my own home. If caring for me is such an unbearable burden, then you are free of it. I want you to pack your things, I want you to leave. The color drained from her face. What did you say? She whispered, as if she couldn't have heard me correctly. I said I want you to leave, I repeated, my voice unwavering. Both of you, pack your bags and get out of my house. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. The fury in her eyes was replaced by sheer, utter disbelief. In her world, this was impossible. The hierarchy had been upended. The managed employee was suddenly firing the CEO. The foundation of her reality had just cracked, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother at a complete loss for words. The silence that followed my declaration was heavier than any argument. My mother, Helen, stood frozen in the doorway, the glass of water trembling in her hand. My words had short-circuited her anger, leaving only stunned disbelief in its wake. My father appeared behind her, drawn by the shouting, his face a canvas of alarm. What's going on? He asked, looking from my mother's pale face to my own resolute expression. Your daughter has lost her mind, Helen finally sputtered, finding her voice. She's throwing us out. After everything we've done for her, she's kicking us out onto the street. Clara, my father looked at me, his eyes pleading for a different explanation. I meant what I said, Dad, I replied, my voice still eerily calm. Mom feels that taking care of me is a form of servitude. I'm relieving her of that duty. This is my house and I want you to leave. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. My mother swung between two tactics, furious indignation and martyred silence. She would storm through the house, slamming cupboards and muttering just loud enough for me to hear about the ungrateful child she had raised. Then she would switch to giving me the silent treatment, refusing to even look at me, communicating only through my father. It was a performance designed to make me feel monstrous, to break my resolve with guilt. It didn't work. The clarity I had felt during our confrontation hadn't faded. Her words, "We're not your damn servants," had severed a cord inside me. I was no longer emotionally tethered to her approval. For the first time, I was seeing her behavior not as a reaction to me, but as a reflection of her own character, and I didn't like what I saw. My father was my only point of contact. He would bring my meals, his face etched with misery. "Clara, please," he'd whisper, "you can't do this. Your mother, she's just stressed. She didn't mean it." "She meant every word, Dad," I'd say, my resolve hardening with each of his excuses. "And the fact that you're defending her instead of asking how I feel tell. Ask me everything I need to know." He would just sigh a deep, defeated sound and leave the room. He was trapped, and instead of trying to find a way out, he was begging me to get back into the trap with him. I knew I couldn't handle this alone, not in my physical condition. I made a phone call. My best friend since college, Sarah, lived 2 towns over. I told her everything: the accident, my mother's resentment, the final, ugly confrontation. "I'll be there tomorrow," she said without a moment's hesitation. Sarah's arrival was like a fresh breeze in a stagnant room. She took one look at my pale face and the tense atmosphere of the house and went into action mode. She ignored my mother's hostile glares and set up a small command center in my room. She brought me food I actually wanted to eat, fluffed my pillows, and most importantly, she listened. She validated my feelings and mirrored my outrage. "Servants, is she kidding me?" Sarah fumed. "You bought them a house, Clara, a whole house." With Sarah there as my witness and my ally, I felt strong enough to make it official. That evening, I called my parents into my room. Sarah sat in a chair by my bed, a silent, supportive presence. "I want to be very clear," I began, looking directly at my mother and father who stood near the door like unwelcome visitors. "This isn't a temporary argument. My decision is final. The title and the mortgage are in my name. Legally, you are tenants in my property. I am giving you official notice. You have 30 days to find another place to live." Helen gasped, placing a hand over her heart in a dramatic gesture. "30 days? Are you insane? We're retirees. We have nowhere to go. You're making us homeless." "That was the situation you were in before I bought this house," I said calmly. "You'll have to figure it out. You can stay with Mark, perhaps. I'm sure he'll be happy to help, considering how much you've helped him." The mention of Mark struck a nerve. My mother's face flushed with anger. "You leave your brother out of this. This is about your selfishness and your cold, ungrateful heart." The argument went in circles for another 10 minutes. My mother threw every accusation she could think of at me. I was selfish, cruel, disrespectful. I was throwing away my family. Through it all, I remained quiet and firm. Sarah's presence was my anchor. Finally, I held up a hand. "The decision is made. 30 days." The next 3 weeks were excruciating. My parents began to pack, but they did it with the mournful lethargy of victims preparing for their own funeral. Boxes were left in hallways. The sound of packing tape being ripped from the roll was an aggressive, angry punctuation to the tense silence. They barely spoke to me. My father would sometimes cast a sad, pleading look in my direction, but he never dared to cross my mother. True to form, Mark was a nonentity. He didn't call. He didn't come over to help his elderly parents pack up their entire lives. The burden, as always, fell on them. On the final day, they hired a small moving truck. As my father loaded the last of their boxes, my mother stood in the doorway of my room for one final confrontation. "I hope you're happy, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Sitting up here in your castle while you throw your own family out. I want you to remember this day. I want you to remember what you've done." "I will," I said, my voice even. "I'll remember it as the day I finally stood up for myself." She scoffed and turned away. I watched from my window as the moving truck pulled away from the curb, taking my old life with it. A profound wave of sadness washed over me, but underneath it there was something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sliver of peace. The house was quiet. The oppressive weight of their judgment was gone. I was alone, injured, and facing an uncertain future, but I was free. I had no idea just how much freedom I had reclaimed, or what secrets the silence of that house was waiting to tell me. The silence in the days after they left was absolute. At first, it was a relief, a soothing balm on my raw nerves. There were no more heavy sighs, no more angry footsteps, no more accusations hanging in the air. The house, which had felt like a battleground, slowly began to feel like a sanctuary. It was mine. The quiet was mine. With Sarah's help, I was managing. She stayed with me for that first week, helping me set up a temporary living space downstairs in the main living room so I could avoid the treacherous stairs. A home care nurse started visiting twice a week to help with my physical therapy exercises. I was slowly, painstakingly reclaiming my body and my home. About 2 weeks after my parents moved out, I decided it was time to tackle the administrative debris they had left in their wake. A formidable pile of mail had accumulated on the small table in the entryway. My parents had been in charge of the mail, and I had trust. Said them to handle it. I hobbled over on my crutches, a laundry basket in hand, and scooped the entire pile up, carrying it to the coffee table. I sat on the couch, my casted leg propped up on a pillow, and began to sort. There were catalogs, junk mail, a few lingering sympathy cards from distant relatives, and then I saw it. The first one was from the electric company. It was a standard white envelope, but across the front in stark red ink were the words, "Final disconnect notice." My brow furrowed in confusion. That couldn't be right. I transferred money into the joint household account every month like clockwork, more than enough to cover the mortgage payment and all the utilities combined. I had set it up to be automatic, foolproof. Maybe it was a mistake. I tossed it onto the coffee table and continued sorting. Then I found another one. This one was from the water company, past due, service to be terminated. Then another from the internet provider and another from the gas company. They all said the same thing, bill after bill, stamped with angry red warnings of overdue balances and imminent disconnection. My heart began to beat a little faster. This wasn't a mistake, this was a pattern. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. I had trusted them completely with the household finances. I had made it easy for them. The money was always there. All they had to do was pay the bills. Why wouldn't they? My laptop was on the couch beside me. With trembling hands, I opened it and navigated to my bank's website. I logged into the joint household account I shared with my mother, the account I fed every month but had never felt the need to inspect. I clicked on View Statements. I opened the most recent statement first. There it was, my monthly transfer of $3,500, which was meant to cover the $2,200 mortgage payment and roughly $800 in utilities, leaving a comfortable cushion for groceries and other expenses. I scrolled down the list of transactions. I saw a few small payments. The minimum payment on the gas bill, a small payment to the electric company, just enough to keep the services from being shut off immediately. But the bulk of the money was unaccounted for. Then I saw it, a recurring transfer, a transaction labeled e-transfer to M. Davidson. M. Davidson, Mark Davidson, my brother. The transfer was for $2,000. It had gone out 2 days after my monthly deposit, every single month for the last 6 months. I clicked on the previous month's statement. It was the same, my deposit of $3,500, a few tiny payments to the utilities, and a massive $2,000 transfer to Mark. I went back another month and another and another. It was a clear, undeniable pattern of deception stretching back almost a year. The room began to feel very cold. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were floating above my own body, watching myself uncover this betrayal. They hadn't just neglected the bills, they had been actively, intentionally redirecting the money. They were letting the house I was paying for fall into financial ruin, risking the disconnection of basic services. Also, they could secretly funnel cash to my brother. The numbers on the screen swam before my eyes. I did a quick, sickening calculation. Over the past year, they had sent Mark close to $20,000. $20,000 of my money, money I worked long, hard hours for, money I had earmarked for the safety and security of our home. The full weight of it hit me like a physical blow. The resentment, the servant's comment, it wasn't just about the inconvenience of caring for me. It was about something far uglier. They were angry because my injury had disrupted their secret financial pipeline. My presence, my needs, my inability to work at full capacity, it threatened the scheme they had going. My mother's anger wasn't that of a tired caregiver, it was the anger of a conspirator whose plan was at risk. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her constant defense of Mark's career, her criticism of my focus on money. They needed me to keep making money, but they didn't want me paying too much attention to where it went. They had painted me as the cold, work-obsessed provider so they could play the role of the devoted parents, all while bleeding me dry for the sake of their golden child. I leaned back against the couch, the laptop sliding onto the cushion beside me. The numbness I felt was profound. It was a betrayal so deep and calculated it almost didn't feel real. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a flash of anger. This was a premeditated, long-term deception orchestrated by my own parents against me for the benefit of my brother. The sadness I had felt when they left was gone, burned away by a cold, hard rage. Any lingering shred of guilt, any doubt about my decision to kick them out evaporated in that moment. I hadn't been ungrateful, I had been a fool, and my family had taken me for everything. Oh, they could get. The rage I felt was a clean, purifying fire. It burned away all the confusion, the hurt, and the guilt, leaving behind only the hard, sharp certainty of what I had to do next. I spent the rest of the day on the phone, paying off thousands of dollars in overdue bills, my voice tight with fury as I explained the situation to confused customer service representatives. With every payment, my resolve solidified. I needed one final conversation, not for reconciliation, but for confrontation. For my own peace of mind, I needed to see their faces when they knew that I knew everything. I sent a single, simple text message to my mother, my father, and my brother. I need you to come to the house tomorrow at noon. It's important. My mother replied almost instantly, "We have nothing to say to you, Clara." "It's about the household finances," I texted back, "Be here." The next day, I prepared the scene. On the coffee table in the living room, I laid out the evidence in three neat piles. The stack of red-stamped disconnect notices, the printed bank statements with the transfers to Mark highlighted in yellow, and a final sheet of paper on which I had tallied the total amount they had diverted. It was a little over $22,000. At precisely noon, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and hobbled over to open it. All three of them were there, standing on my porch. My mother's expression was defiant, my father's was anxious, and Mark S. was a mixture of nervousness and irritation, as if this were a massive inconvenience. "What is this all about, Clara?" my mother demanded as they stepped inside. "We're very busy." "Are you?" I asked, my voice devoid of warmth. "Please have a seat." I gestured to the couches. They remained standing, a united, hostile front. "I'd rather stand," Helen said. "Fine," I said, turning and making my way back to my own chair. "I just have a few things I'd like to return to you." I sat down and gestured to the coffee table. "This is for you," I said, pushing the pile of overdue bills towards them. "A collection of your managerial work for the past year." My father's face went pale. Mark shifted his feet, refusing to look at the papers. My mother, however, held her ground. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I pushed the second pile forward. "Then perhaps these will refresh your memory. They're bank statements from the household account, the one I so foolishly trusted you with." I tapped the highlighted lines. "See these transfers, $22,000 sent directly to Mark's bank account over the past 12 months. Money that was supposed to be for the mortgage, for the electricity, for the water, for the home you were living in rent-free." The silence in the room was absolute. Mark looked as if he was about to be sick. My father stared at the floor, the picture of shame. He knew, he had known all along and had done nothing. My mother was the only one who met my gaze. For a second, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes, the look of a cornered animal, but it was quickly replaced by her familiar, impenetrable wall of defiance. She let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a horrifying sound. "Oh, is that what this is about, money? It always comes back to money with you, Clara." I stared at her, genuinely speechless at the audacity. "Your brother needed it," she continued, her voice rising, gathering steam. He is an artist trying to make his way in the world. He has dreams. You have a fancy job. You have all this money you don't know what to do with. What's a few $1,000s to you? It's nothing. It's a rounding error. We were just helping our son, your brother. A family is supposed to help each other. A family doesn't steal from one of their children to give to the other, I shot back, my own voice rising to match hers. A family doesn't lie for a year straight. You didn't help him. You enabled him. You stole from me to fund his fantasy of being a rock star while the home I provided for you was on the verge of having its power shut off. You did this while looking me in the eye every single day. I turned to my brother. And you, Mark, you took it. You took the money month after month, knowing exactly where it was coming from, knowing I was the one working my fingers to the bone to pay for it all. Not once did you say no. Not once did you think maybe you should get a real job instead of bleeding your sister dry. Mark couldn't look at me. Mom said you wouldn't miss it, he mumbled, his voice pathetically small. And you believed her, I said, the statement flat and final. That was it. That was the last nail in the coffin of the family I thought I had. My mother was a manipulator, my father was a coward, and my brother was a willing accomplice in their deception. There was nothing left to salvage. Get out, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. All of you, get out of my house. My Mo. Her opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. I mean it, the financial support is over. The bank account is closed. Mark, I don't expect I'll ever see a dime of that money back from you, but I hope you remember for the rest of your life that your comfort was built on my betrayal. And Mom, Dad, don't call me, don't text me, don't come here again, we are done. This time there was no argument. My mother shot me a look of pure hatred, turned on her heel and marched out the door. Mark scurried after her. My father was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked back at me, his eyes filled with tears. Clara, I'm so sorry, he whispered. I know you are, Dad, I said, and the sadness in my own voice surprised me. But being sorry isn't enough. He nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek, and then he closed the door behind him, leaving me alone in the quiet. The months that followed were about healing in every sense of the word. My leg got stronger, and with each successful physical therapy session, I felt my independence returning. I redecorated the house room by room, exorcising the ghosts of their presence. I painted the walls, bought new furniture, and filled the space with things that I loved. It slowly transformed from a house into a home, my home. I started seeing a therapist who helped me unpack the decades of toxic family dynamics I had mistaken for love. The grief for the family I thought I had was immense, but with it came a profound sense of liberation. I was no longer living my life according to their expectations or for their benefit. I was living for me. I don't know what became of them. I heard through a cousin that Mark finally got a job waiting tables and that my parents were living in a small, cramped apartment. I feel a distant pang of sadness for them, but it's overshadowed by the peace I've found. My life is quiet now and sometimes lonely, but it's honest. It's mine. I was a resource they drained until I broke, but they didn't realize that in breaking me, they had finally set me free. So Reddit, I guess I'm asking, what would you have done? Did I do the right thing, or did I destroy my family over money and a moment of anger?